and I work in the Oxford TEFL team, and this is my colleague Rob.
Hello everyone.
Hello, so today we're going to be giving you some useful hints and tips on how you can train your TEFLs or your trainees on how to teach English. Before we do that though, we have to look at how do you learn first of all. We want to have a look at this model, which is called the 70-20-10 model. And what this does is it looks at how you learn during the workplace. So 70% of the time we learn through experience, 20% of the time we learn through observations, and 10% of the time we learn through formal training or theory. Let's have a look at these individually.
Okay, so we're going to start with the 10%, which is the theory. So the first point is about grammar. So this is making sure that trainees are up to date with their grammar. They know what they're talking about, starting with very, very simple things like what a noun is or what an adjective is, and then working right through to some of the harder things. So active and passive voice, reported speech, phrasal verbs, these types of things.
Yeah, it's really important for trainees to understand grammar. The way you learn grammar during a TEFL course, for example, is not necessarily how you teach it, but it's still really important to understand, what's the difference between the third conditional and the second conditional. So for example, if you're going to create a lesson on the third conditional, you don't want to mix the two up, otherwise the student gets confused and then they're not learning properly.
Okay, so the next point is teaching methods. Everyone has their own method, their own teaching style. This is something that is always being developed. Here we like to teach in the communicative approach, so that's where the conversation is used as much as possible. Lesson planning is next point. It's very, very important that all trainees are prepared for their classes.
And the best way for us to teach a method on how to create lessons is through the PPP method. So the 3 Ps, they stand for presentation, practice, and production. So what that means is that at the beginning of the class, the teacher presents the target language, then together with the student, they practice the target language, and finally, the third part is getting the student to produce the language themselves. When they can do that themselves, you know that they're learning the target language.
Okay, and the final point is classroom management then. So this is making sure that the trainees are prepared for any possible problems that they could have in the classroom.
Okay, now on to observing others. So this is the 20% part. Why is this important? This is important because, well, before you can really do something, it's good to be able to see someone else do it first, right? So how can you help your TEFLs or your trainees observe others? Well, you can pair them up with different teachers who are already teaching classes. And through that, our advice is provide them with a multitude of classes, lots of different teachers, lots of different teaching styles, lots of different types of classes, so age groups, levels, and all those things. And that way, what happens is the student can see lots of different styles, lots of different ways you teach in certain situations, and they can formulate in their minds how they can teach in those situations too.
Okay then, so the final part is the 70%, which is the experience. So this is the real life practice that the trainees will have in the classroom.
Okay, and so let's have a look at this in more detail. What we are proposing is that you as a trainer of trainees, you as someone who's helping people become a teacher, we propose 2 things. So 1, help them prepare, and secondly, give them feedback on teaching that they have already done. Let's have a look at them individually. So let's start with preparation. What can you do to help them prepare for a class?
Okay then, so the first point is to make sure that they understand the material. So this is you helping them prepare for their class before they go to it. It's important so that the TEFLs know exactly what they're talking about in the classroom.
Yeah, so that might mean that, I'll give you an example, the materials on the present simple. The student, the TEFL or the trainee, they have to know what is the present simple, when is it used, how is it formed, lots of examples of how to use it, maybe synonyms of different words or different ways. So all these things will help them understand the material, and that way, if they don't understand the material, they can give a good class. What's next? Okay, we suggest that before someone teaches, that they do simulated training first. So create a safe environment for the student, create a fake class with real material. In that class, have their peers, you as a teacher or trainer, And together you can have fake classes, and that way it's a good way for people to learn in a safe environment. You know that they're doing something well, and then you can say, okay, now you can go in the real world and you can do just like that. What we also recommend is that you video the students. Not everybody likes to be videoed at first, but it is really useful. So at the beginning, they might be a bit nervous, but when they start seeing how they change through watching themselves, it will become really useful.
Okay, then. So the next point is to brainstorm. So what does that mean? It simply means just as a group to come up with as many ideas as possible that you could take into the classroom. The idea is to learn from each other.
And similarly, you can give each other feedback. So your peers or the TEFL's peers can give each other feedback on how they would maybe do the lesson, what they would change. And if you have a group of people doing that, then what you're having is lots of people giving lots of different types of advice, and through that it's you get much more richer information on how to teach certain classes. And that moves us neatly on to feedback then. So what happens with feedback? Well, let's say that your trainee is actually teaching a real class. Maybe it's a volunteer, or maybe it's a real class where a student is actually paying for the class. What can you do to ensure that those students are receiving good feedback so they can improve for next time?
Okay, so the first thing is to be positive. Even though maybe some negative feedback needs to be given, you can always do that in a positive way. Try to be as constructive as possible if you're giving criticism.
Yeah. And next, be objective. So why is this important? This is important because if the recipient of the information, of the feedback, believes that the feedback is true, then they're more likely to change their behavior. And how do you make sure that they believe it's true? Try and be as objective as possible. So a couple of tips. One, try not to use subjective language. So try not to say I think or maybe. And secondly, note down things you see and hear, and then repeat those back to the student or to the trainee. And that way they can say, okay, yes, that's true, that did happen. And then you work from there.
Yeah. The other thing you can always do is ask them how they felt or they thought the class went before you give your comments back to them. You can also use together to come up with some suggestions for improvement. Don't just criticize, maybe say maybe what you would have done differently or what they could have done differently.
Mm-hmm. And finally, timing. So timing is really important when you're giving feedback. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give the feedback immediately afterwards. I'll give you an example. Someone's had their first class, it didn't go according to plan, they're maybe a bit upset afterwards. That's maybe not a good time for you to give them negative feedback. However, it doesn't mean you shouldn't give them the feedback at all. You have to wait. Wait until the right moment, maybe when things have calmed down. And it's important that you do give the feedback before their next class so they don't repeat the errors. Okay, well, that's it. So that's that concludes the presentation. What did we cover today? So we covered the 70-20-10 model. That is ways that people learn. People learn 70% of the time through experience, 20% of the time through observations, and 10% of the time through theory. We had a look at the ways that we can teach people theory, grammar, teaching methodologies, lesson planning, and classroom management, ways that you can get people to observe others. And then we looked at the 70%, which is the experience. What can you do to help them? That would be prepare them well and give them good feedback so they learn for the next time. All right, now it's over to questions and answers. And I see that we already have some questions. So I'll just read them out and Rob and I will answer this. Okay, so we've got one from Maria. What are the challenges that the English teachers have to face currently? Okay.
I think some of the challenges that maybe an English teacher can have is if you've got some students who are in the same group who have very different levels. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that trainees need to work on. That's part of the experience. Mm-hmm. I think that comes with, you can only do so much theory about it, but it's actually being in the classroom that you learn the tips and the hints that you can use.
Mm-hmm. So ideally you don't want to have different levels in a class. It's not, you want to have people the same level, but actually when you get into the real world, it sometimes happens. For example, let's say a company wants to save money, and so instead of having two small groups, they can have one big group. So it happens in the real world. They put people together that maybe aren't exactly the right levels. So yeah, it is. I agree. It's definitely through experience that you learn to try and ensure that, some people aren't left out and you're not making it too boring for others.
Yeah, I think it could be the same with different age levels as well. Maybe you've got a large age gap, a teenager and an adult. Sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge that a teacher needs to work around.
Although I'd say that the biggest challenges that trainees have are, I don't know if you agree, Rob, but I would say it's grading language and it is error correction.
Absolutely. I think grading your language, by that we mean making sure that you're using the right words for the correct level, not using too difficult expressions or words for a very low level. And I think that's definitely the most difficult thing to work on and to improve.
Yeah, because really what happens when you're grading your language is, you're choosing the right words, but you're slowing your speech down, and you might speak like this. This isn't natural, so this is not a natural way to speak. But for someone who's a low level, it's perfectly appropriate. So it's really changing physical things, like the change in your voice or whatever, and that stuff, it can be a little bit difficult when the trainee is thinking about the content and maybe they're a bit nervous being around people.
Yeah, I think they also don't want to feel like they're patronizing students in some ways. Actually it's important. You have to do it.
That's true. There is a kind of fine line between patronizing a student and teaching them appropriate to their level, and it just takes a little bit of practice. It's not something you learn immediately. Okay, let's move on to the next question. How long does it take to become a good teacher? Wow, okay, that's a big question.
It's like how long is a piece of string, I guess, right?
The TEFL course, most TEFL courses are 4 weeks, all right? Now, does that mean that you are an expert at teaching after 4 weeks? No, but it should mean that you've got the fundamentals and you're ready to at least start teaching. I would say, I've been teaching for 3 years, teaching English for 3 years. Am I an expert at teaching English? I don't know. Maybe I'm going to learn more in the next year. I have no idea. Am I a good teacher? Well, maybe I'd like to think so. But
I think you're always learning. I think no matter if you've been teaching for 3 years, 3 months, or 30 years, I think there's always stuff you can work on, always stuff to improve on. And you can always learn new tips, like hints for the classroom.
Also, it completely depends on the person. So it depends on your skill level, depends on how much experience you get, depends on the training program. So some training programs are very theoretical. And as we just covered, 10% of what you learn in the workplace is theoretical. So, you got to try and make it as practical as possible. So, it depends on the train, depends on the individual, and, it depends on your definition of good teacher, I guess, as well. So, all right, what else do we have? Right, from Christina Bundy. What skills do I need to master in the first place so that I'm ready to teach good classes?
I think we talked a couple of them about them then. So grading the language.
Yeah. But, I would say that the first thing is rapport. I think that even if you are unable to grade your language very well, because I'm talking from the perspective of someone that is brand new. So first thing is if you can really make the student feel comfortable, at ease, that's half the bottle is won. They get on your side. You can be really good at grading, you can be really good at error correction, but if the student doesn't like you, well, you're probably not going to see them again. All right. What else do we have? Why do you put so much emphasis on the teaching practice with real students and not volunteers? I think that both are useful to teach a student or a volunteer. But there's nothing quite like getting the real experience. If you teach with a real student, then you have that feeling that you really are giving them a proper service, I suppose.
Yeah, they're paying customers, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, they expect a minimum quality of service. They're expecting the top, so you've got to be used to teaching real students. Volunteers also, like we said, have their benefits. They can help you to improve all the time, and they're real students. It's not like a mock class, but no, I think with real students, real paying students is the best way to
Yeah, okay, so if you mean, when you say volunteers, do you mean like when you're doing simulated practice?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
all with your peers from the class.
Completely. So a simulated practice really is fine. It only gets you so far, but real practice is you're basically creating real life examples of what you're going to be doing when you are teaching. Simulated is what it is. It's a fake class. It's not completely real. Yeah. Yes, the content might be the same, but the actual experience is going to be different. All right. What else do we have? Rob, do you want to read the next one?
Yeah, I was thinking we have one from Gracia. So why is working as a community better than planning classes individually?
Oh well, I mean, basically it's about economies of scale. When you are working as a community and you're teaching, you're creating a material, one person can create something that everyone can use. I mean, if you've got lots of students and lots of teachers, then you really do benefit from working together as a team. Don't you
Yeah,
think?
no, I completely
Yeah.
agree. I think pulling together, working together, learning from each other all the time is the best way, you know.
Yeah, because a hundred students at the same level and the same age group, the same sort of what their same objective of why they want to learn English, they can learn the same things every week. So you can create one piece of material and teach them all.
Absolutely. And we've got two questions which are similar in some ways. So we've got one from Patricia saying, also students that do not want to learn, that's a big challenge. And
Wow,
one from
yeah.
Michael, how do you work with students who don't want to have their errors corrected?
Oh my goodness,
Or
okay.
who simply ignore your efforts to do so? I think we've both had some students
Yeah.
like that.
All right. So this presentation is assumes that the other person is receptive to feedback and wants to learn. I would say that if you don't want to learn, then I don't think you should be I don't know if you should be a teacher. Maybe you're in the wrong profession if you don't want to learn, because your profession is you got to teach other people. So if you don't want to learn, why are you doing this? However, if you do have a train that isn't receptive to this sort of thing, again, I would say be as objective as possible. So it could be that person is not taking on board what you're saying because they just don't believe it to be true. So try and be as objective as possible. Don't know if you've got any other tips.
Absolutely. No, yeah. I think, and I was thinking also from if there is a student, there's certain ways you can try to encourage them, point out some positives, as to working together will help us all.
Yeah. Cool. All right. What else do we have? Can we be good teachers without any material at all? Yeah, well, I think you can do a good class with good material. Whether you are a good teacher, I mean, you have, it's two things. So you have to have good material and you have to be good at teaching. You can't have one without the other. I think that if you are a really good teacher, and let's say that you're really good with rapport and you make people laugh, and yeah, it's great, but why are those students there? Are they there because they're learning English, or are they there because you provide them entertainment? It's not. That can be done on a Friday night with your friends, So I wonder, how much would someone want to pay for classes and not really feel like their level's progressing? So yeah, you need to have good material and you need to be a good teacher. You need to have both.
Yeah, I think the two go hand in hand. Of course, you can as a teacher learn little tricks and hints that you can use in the classroom if for whatever reason you find yourself with incorrect material or no material at all. I think that comes with experience and time.
Yeah.
And learning from each other and learning to know what you can do if you come across a problem like that.
Yeah. What do we have any more questions? I guess we got a minute before we can answer. So the conclusions again. So really, what we're talking about here is we're trying to give people trying to give you tips on how you can help your trainees and how you can help them become good teachers. Give them as much experience as possible, give them good material, help them prepare, give them feedback. So that's all. I guess we're done here. So thank you very much, everybody, for contributing with the questions, and I hope you enjoyed the session. See you.